Hey, everybody, Saul Marquez with the Outcomes Rocket. I want to welcome you back to the podcast. Today, I have the privilege of hosting Stan Rose. He is a biologist, life sciences executive, and serial entrepreneur. Dr. Rose has spent over 3 decades working with leading scientists and clinicians to create substantial commercial value from investors related to DNA and genome analysis. During that time, he has raised more than $100 million in financing and led businesses to create more than $1 billion in market value by enabling advances in biological research, diagnostics, and therapeutics. Most recently, he was co-founder, president, and CEO of Transplant Genomics, which was acquired by Eurofins in 2019, whose TrueGraph blood gene expression test enabled doctors to rule out silent rejection in kidney transplant recipients. Many more things that he's done, and we'll cover those in today's podcast. But really excited for you to join us, Stan. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Saul. Appreciate it.
Of course. It's a pleasure. And, you know, we were having some great discussions sort of before we hit the record button around motivations for doing things. And so why don't you share with the listeners, what is it that got you into healthcare innovation to begin with?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that got me into it to begin with, was that I was actually pursuing a career in academia. And I was really frustrated by the fact that in order to be successful, you really had to focus very narrowly. And, really sort of the objective was to become the world's expert in your niche and raise grant money and write papers and, build a career around one very narrow area. But I've always had a bit of a problem that I've been interested in too many things. And I just saw so much opportunity in the world of what was then the emerging world of molecular biology and what became biotechnology. And at the root of it all was the opportunity to actually make discoveries that would lead to products and services that would help improve people's lives. And I came to the conclusion that the only way to effectively do that was by being involved with the company. And, I spent some number of years, was very fortunate early in my career that I got involved with some of the folks who really led the what was then the Human Genome Project, which very certainly focused me very much on the potential for DNA analysis and genome analysis. And then after that, got involved with the PCR business when that was just a brand new technology. And that was one of the most exciting things I've ever been involved in, and certainly easily the most impactful. If I think about all the areas in which PCR is now utilized. And then after that, it was really branching out on my own and trying to find ways to sort of experience that kind of impact again. I will tell you that it was funny. I remember very distinctly having a conversation with one of the board members of what was then called the management committee of the PerkinElmer PCR business, and I remember, and this was for 7 years later, right? And we met at a conference. I remember he came over, he put his arm around me. He says, "Weren't those days in PCR great? You're never going to have that much fun in business again." And I was devastated. And, and I thought that can't possibly be the case. And ever since then, I've been, really motivated to prove him wrong again and again and again. And fortunately have found some phenomenal people to work with over the years. And I had multiple experiences. So.
No, that's great, Stan. So then you certainly have done it many times, and so what would you say for the entrepreneurs listening, right? From your experiences with the PCR business at PerkinElmer, the work that you did with Cellular Dynamics International, like what's the key to succeed as an entrepreneur in healthcare?
Well, I don't know if there is a single key. I certainly believe pretty strongly in sort of the combination of um, confidence, commitment, and persistence. And I find that often people who have success in multiple successes, um, sort of have this combination of characteristics that almost prevent them from being stopped.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last 2 years, and in fact, have a book that's coming out in March
Oh,
um,
nice.
under the title "Can't Tame a Mongoose," which most people will have no idea what that means. But
Nice.
so you'll have to take a look at the book. But the sort of the central idea is really that what trips up many businesses is sort of of um, the inability of either a CEO or their team to effectively navigate past events they never expected, um, or to leverage opportunities that they never anticipated. And
Mm.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about, the kinds of approaches, values, skills that enhance the likelihood of being able to, either get past or leverage those kinds of what I call inevitable, unexpected events, um, to ultimately get to a successful outcome. And yeah, I don't want to take up the whole time talking about it here, but
Yeah.
it's been estimated that 90% of technology based businesses don't survive more than 5 years. And these are businesses that, were started by intelligent people who had good plans, who, many of whom raised money. So their plans were vetted. Somebody believed in them. They probably put pretty good teams together, and yet, they still didn't succeed. And there's been lots of discussion in business schools and accelerators and various consultants out there, about, the general nature of the things that prevented people from succeeding. But I think one thing that's hasn't been discussed enough is, being prepared to deal with events that you just never expected,
Yeah.
regardless of the nature of those. So,
And I like how you refer to them, Stan, as inevitable,
yeah,
unpredictable things that will happen.
I honestly have not met a CEO yet that I've spoken with who hasn't experienced something like this. And just to be clear, even though I've read the book and am a fan of the whole idea, this is distinctly different from black swan events. So I'm not
Um,
talking about
okay. Okay.
sort of rare events that have outsized impact. Certainly those occur, um, and Nicholas Taleb has written all about that. But I'm talking about things that happen much more frequently, um,
Um,
and again, frequently enough that if you've been around several years in any business, it would be shocking to me that you wouldn't have run into something you never saw coming.
and so the untamable mongoose, is that the name of it?
Can't tame a mongoose.
Can't tame a mongoose.
Can't tame a mongoose.
Uh,
So
that
it's a West Indian saying that I picked up in the Caribbean from a friend of mine that it has several meanings.
yeah.
In sort of a derogatory sense, it can mean somebody who is just stuck on a certain way of thinking or behaving, and doesn't matter what anybody says, then they won't change. But in a
Okay.
positive sense, it can mean the type of person who is so committed to achieving their goal that it doesn't matter what you throw in their way. They're going to find a way around it. They can't be stopped. They can't be tamed. They're going to achieve their goal. And
I love that.
that's the way I view successful CEOs.
I love that. That's inspiring, and we all run into things in our businesses that could potentially discourage us from continuing. That could
Yeah.
plant a seed of doubt. And the this can't tame a mongoose concept that Stan's talking to us about is very important, and one that we should keep in mind. And And then there's probably a framework around it too, right, Stan? That's sort of like, what is it that makes the mongoose untamable?
Right. And I don't want to get so literally into what the mongoose does, but some
Yeah.
of the aspects are,
Let's,
it
this is
really
fun.
is this. It's so. Mongooses typically kill snakes.
They
Actually,
do?
they were
Okay.
they are not native to the Caribbean, but they were introduced there in order to kill snakes. There's a funny
No.
little story with that as to why that wasn't so effective. But uh, but in any event, it's sort of this combination of focus and drive
Yeah.
and creativity. And if one thing doesn't work, being open to pivoting and taking a different strategy. So all of those are relevant to CEOs, I believe, and their success. But I'd throw in a few others, such as building up a really strong network of relationships, um, and then being, not being afraid to leverage those, not being, whether it's your board, your advisors, or just somebody you met somewhere along the way that happens to have the skill set that maybe you never thought you'd need, but all of a sudden
Uh-huh.
you do. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's one reason that networking is so incredibly important. It's not, it's the unexpected things that you can learn from people or leverage that, at the time you meet them, you might have no idea that you would ever need access to their skills. So there's that, there's relationships, there's financing. I mean, it's, the number of companies that have underestimated how long it would take, how much money they'd need, and what the conditions were like at the time when they need the money for raising funds. I mean, there's many stories of businesses failing because of that. So, so sort of always thinking about, where would I get that extra money if I needed it? Some people are very conservative and will always try to raise significantly more than they need for this exact reason. But at least thinking about what would I do if I needed more?
Mm.
Um, what would I do if the markets, went south and didn't open up again for 2 years, right?
Yeah. Like
It's
with COVID.
kind of thinking exactly. Yeah, I bet if you look back at who made it through and who didn't, I bet you'll find a correlation there. So there's a host of things that like that. I would say I would also throw in the sort of various aspects of corporate culture. So thinking about pulling together diverse teams, people who have complementary skills, creating an environment where people can thrive, sort of independent of different approaches to work style. Um, Creating an environment where people just feel good about being there, and as a leader, just creating a shared sense of mission, so that when you hit tough times, people bailing, like, they're,
Yeah.
people are really committed. They want to see this thing be successful. So that's sort of the flavor of what I write about. And then
I
I
love
just
it.
give some real world examples of, things that I've lived through that I think are illustrative and will, hopefully people enjoy reading about. So
That's fantastic, Stan. And there's so many people out there that haven't done it, and now they're writing books. They
yeah,
haven't done it, and now they're advising. Stan has done it. He's done it several times, very successfully. I'm always very interested in learning from people and leaders like Stan that have been there and done that. So I'm excited to pick up your book when it comes out, Stan, and certainly look forward to digging in. You know, um, and on the concept of sort of just the types of companies you've built. Let's dig into a little bit of on your last one, just
sure.
so we can learn about that. Transplant genomics, like
Yeah,
you really kind of helped with this concept of ruling out silent rejection in kidney transplants. Like, where did the idea start? How did you grow into your first customer and then the exit?
sure. So the short background on this is that in 2002, I found out that I had a genetic disease called polycystic kidney disease. And 9 years later, in 2011, it turned out as a consequence of that genetic disease, I needed to have a kidney transplant.
Oh, wow.
And that all went really well. I'm eternally grateful to my living donor, who was actually a coworker, um,
Amazing.
who had donated one of his kidneys.
Wow.
And about 2 years later, I was doing great. So I just assumed that my doctors have this covered. You know, they, they're watching out for me. But a friend of mine sent me a paper about biomarkers in transplantation. And I read through it and I realized that they actually don't know how well I'm doing. And they're just watching, waiting to see whether or not I get sick. And at the point that I show signs of sickness, which is sort of outright rejection, um, it's pretty tough. I mean, it can be managed, but you've taken a hit, and the likelihood that that kidney is going to last as long as it would have otherwise is significantly lower. So, um, at the same time, I learned about this notion of silent rejection, which is, could there be a way to use biomarkers to that you could detect in blood or in urine, um, to give you an indication that you had begun rejecting before you had any outward signs, before the physicians could tell that you were sick, early enough that
Right.
you could intervene, address the rejection that had started, and enable these kidneys to live longer and the patients to live longer. And so that's what we set out to do. I wound up connecting with a group at Northwestern, and another group at Scripps, and the leaders of those two groups, Mike Abacassis and Dan Solomon, became my co-founders. And within a few months, we decided to start a company. At the time, I really thought, with all the experience and knowledge I've accumulated, what could I possibly work on that'd be more important than a biomarker based test that might extend my own life and at the
My
same
God.
time impact the lives of hundreds of thousands of other kidney transplant recipients. So that's what we set out to do. Um, Long story, a lot of things happened in between, a lot of unexpected events,
Yeah.
that we managed to navigate through. One of the worst ones being that Dan Solomon, one of my co-founders, um, developed colon cancer and ultimately died.
Wow, man.
And this is both very sad, but also devastating to the company. And so, it's not something that I think anyone ever thinks about ahead of time. Like, what would I do if my
Yeah.
co-founder and lead scientist, um, all of a sudden isn't there anymore? Um, so in any event, we held together as a team and we got through it. And we ultimately, leveraged strong relationships with leading transplant programs and got our tests, both used in the clinic as well as reimbursed by CMS. And then we became very attractive as an acquisition target. And ultimately, Eurofins came along and made a bid to acquire the company, in which they did in May of 2019. And then I actually stayed on as CEO for a year and then as executive chairman for another year. So I sort of slowly migrated
Kind of
out over
weaned away.
time as, people, you know, from within the organization, got more familiar with the business and, things were on steady ground. So that's the TGI story. And
Man, that's a great story. And so now there's a test that allows you to look at these biomarkers, and it's urine and
right now it's blood. There are
blood.
tests being developed in urine. I'm fairly confident, will become commercially available. I can't imagine any reason why they won't, based on the data I've seen, but they're just not far along enough yet in, in terms of either the clinical validation studies that are needed to be published or being reimbursable. And those two things are really critical for any diagnostic test.
Man, that's awesome. Great story and a success story at that, with some examples of what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, right? Some tragic events, but just being that untamable mongoose
That's right.
to get through those things. Stan, this has been such an awesome conversation. I think when your book comes out, we should have you back on just to help share it with our listeners who, is a lot of people in healthcare, leaders in healthcare are looking to make a positive difference. If you had to leave our listeners with any takeaway point, what would you leave them with?
Well, I think it's the main point of Can't Tame a Mongoose. It's just always beware of the what I call inevitable unexpected event. Um, it's no matter how much planning you've done, no matter how much your plan's been vetted, something is likely to come up that you never saw coming. And just being as prepared as possible, sort of creating a practice. I almost think about it as I spent a lot of time in the last few years with yoga, and I think
Right.
about it as sort of creating a regular practice that if you're living that, then when the situation arises, you don't have to all of a sudden scramble, for example, to build a network or to wonder where am I going to access money or um, to think about how might I pivot this business because you've already thought about other options. So if that's
Good.
all incorporating your approach to business, and you've developed a culture where the members of your team, share your passion for the mission and want to keep going. They're not going to bail on you. So yeah, that's to me, that's the closing message. And again, yeah, it's called Can't Tame Mongoose, should be out in March. And I think if anybody wants any more information, you can take a look at my website, which is at roseventures, all one word, .net, NET. And yeah, Saul, thanks. It's been great talking with you.
Oh, yeah. No, this has been a ton of fun, Stan. Thank you so much. And folks, I say it every time. If something today inspired you, don't stop at listening. Take action. Check out Stan's website, and we'll be back when he releases the book so you guys could take advantage of the amazing experience that he's lived through and apply it to your own ventures and opportunities. Stan, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Take care.